Well, I'm joined now by the journalist Philip Pangalos, who's also in Athens for us. Philip, thanks very much for joining us on Sky News. It was a marathon session in the capital. There have been marathon negotiations in Brussels as well. Do you think most Greeks will wake up feeling relieved or betrayed by this result?
I think a bit of both. I think more relief at the end of the line, as you said earlier. The alternative doesn't bear thinking about. Falling, a disorderly default and falling out of the Eurozone really would be catastrophic. I mean, Greeks have suffered enough in the past 5 years of austerity and the last 5 or 6 months, and obviously in the last 2 weeks since capital controls have come into place and banks have closed. So people have been very worried. I mean, they're not happy, I think, overall about the deal. They feel they've been blackmailed into a bad deal which has more recessionary measures, even though there is scope for debt relief and a sizable fund, 35 billion, for growth under the Juncker project. So there is a bright side to it as well. But I think people overall are relieved. And going on what you were saying earlier on, in a poll we had just this week, something like 80% of Greeks want to stay in the Eurozone, and something like 70% wanted their government to vote for these proposals tonight, and they were carried with a large majority. I mean, we had 229 yes votes, 64 no votes, and 6 abstentions. Of course, the key question is that I think Alexis Tsipras' government has come out wounded, I think, after tonight's vote, because he had 39 of his own Syriza MPs who didn't back him. I think there were 32 no votes, 6 abstentions, and 1 absentee. So that's quite a blow for him, and that includes a handful of ministers and former ministers. And as you said, that includes the former finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, the parliamentary speaker Zoe Kosatapoulou, and a couple of other senior ministers, Panagiotis Lafazanis, who's the energy minister and is the leader of the so-called left faction. This is the hard left grouping within his party who have been opposed to more austerity, which, not forgetting, Mr. Tsipras was elected on a pledge not to have more austerity, and he's got a lot more austerity for the next 3 years. But there'll be a relief. They'll be looking to an ECB meeting later today, which hopefully will give more emergency liquidity to Greek banks and help keep them open, because they were on the verge of collapsing, and also looking to be able to get this 7 billion of intermediate funding that's being talked about, which will help them pay 3.5 billion that's due next week to the ECB. So they need money quick. This is just the beginning. Hard times ahead. I wouldn't be surprised to see a cabinet reshuffle as early as tomorrow, because, as we said, a number of his own ministers vote against measures, and you can't see how they will be able to implement the reforms they're going to be asked to implement. So tough times ahead. He's still not out of the woods yet, and there's also a risk down the line. If they can't get this together, he might even have to form a national unity government. He has, after all, lost his majority out of the 149 seats that he has, and another 13 with his junior coalition partner, the Independent Greeks. They're down to about 123 now after tonight's, if you count tonight's votes. But they've just escaped the dangerous 121 limit, which under the Greek constitution means they would have to have given over to a caretaker government.
Philip, you've been talking about what's been going on inside Parliament, but there's also been some protests, many protests outside Parliament as well. Do you think this is just the start of much more to come?
Quite possibly. As you said earlier on, it was a minority of people. There were a few thousand people out there, and it was only dozens, maybe 100 or so, who obviously were intent on causing violence and threw petrol bombs and rocks at riot police, who, as always, returned fire with tear gas and stun grenades. But, there were messy scenes in the centre of Athens. It's not the sort of thing we want to see. Several cars were torched, windows, lots of shops had their windows smashed, banks were vandalised. It's not exactly pleasant. Having said that, I've seen a lot worse, not for some time, not for a year and a half or so, but obviously a couple of years ago at the peak of the riots we had a lot worse scenes with a lot more people out there rioting. It's going to be tense times, difficult times for Greece, for Greeks, and especially so for Mr. Alexis Tsipras.
Philip Pangalos in Athens for us. Thank you.